don't know if you've ever had to prove that you exist and are a real person living in your country, but if this has ever happened to you or is currently happening to you, where you have a bunch of ID that is absolutely useless to you and you're basically undocumented, I'm gonna share with you what that process looks like, because I've had to do it twice now. For a little bit of context, my biological grandmother made some poor choices and illegally immigrated to the US, and then my biological mother made some poor choices and illegally immigrated to Canada. Because if you bring children from a country that they are legally citizens of to a country they are not legally citizens of, that child cannot work or do literally anything legally. As a child in Canada, the only reason that was discovered is because we went into foster care. Thankfully, the Alberta government is kind of reasonable about these things. They looked at me as a little 8-year-old and they said, we probably can't ethically deport an 8-year-old back to the US. That would be wrong. So we will do our best to get the process in motion so that this little 8-year-old can stay with their younger siblings who are natural-born Canadian citizens, so that we can preserve this family unit for the good of the children. Thankful for that on so many levels. I could not imagine being deported to the US, which I have no memories of, and then being forced to live in foster care somewhere over there. That would be terrible. There was a lot of things the courts had to do, and part of that ended up falling on my adopted parents, where they were like, hey, if you want to adopt these children, this one specifically, you're gonna have to contact the US Embassy to get birth certificates for them. You're gonna have to figure out how to get a passport for this child, and then we're gonna have to wait for all those documents, get all those documents together, just so they can apply to be a permanent resident. Very complicated. My adopted parents were like, yeah, sure, we can do that. It was a lot of work. There's a lot of writing letters to judges and being like, hey, this is a real child. A lot of complicated things. Please approve this document. Thank you. And that was like, I want to say a 3 or 4 year process. One little fun side note about me is that like from the time I was 9, I was like obsessed with being a Canadian citizen. It was like the one thing I wanted, because I knew how terrible being an illegal immigrant had been for literally everyone in my bloodline. So I was like obsessed with it. You know, I was like, Canada's my home. This is where I live. This is where my siblings are. I'm going to be a Canadian citizen. And I was also like so immensely grateful that the province had like put all this money and effort and time into helping me, that I was like, I'm going to be a great citizen. I'm going to vote every single year. I'll be the best one. I'll write letters to my member of parliament every single day. And yeah, I was like obsessed with it. I'd like fall asleep imagining like when I'd get to do the oath and stuff. When I was in social studies class later on, I study furiously because I was like, any of this could be on the citizenship test. I don't know yet, but it could be. And yeah, that was where my brain was at for several years. So I got my permanent residency when I was like 13. Now, permanent residency, great to have. It's basically like, as long as you live in Canada, you can do that. You're allowed to work here. The only thing you really can't do is vote. And that was kind of a bummer for me. But it was, you know, the step, because you need to be a permanent resident before you can be a Canadian citizen. So I was like, okay, I can do this. You know, I just gotta wait till I'm 18, because that was roughly when my permanent residency had been long enough that I could legally apply to be a Canadian citizen, even though I've literally been here since I was 5. Through the years, I've things disintegrated slowly. I think the best scene to describe this here is, I would like you to imagine a 16-year-old me sitting at the kitchen table trying to do my homework. I had just gotten my first job at Tim Hortons. I was very exhausted and tired. It was almost full-time hours, which they were not supposed to be doing, but they did anyways. I was exhausted. I was tired. My dad is sitting on the couch staring at his phone, pretending I don't exist. My mother is off screaming at somebody. They look across the living room at me and they say, do you know how to do your taxes? And I said, no, I'm not really sure what those are. My adopted mother, she goes to the office. She prints like a 3-centimeter thick package of documents for me, slaps them down on the table and goes, well, you better learn. And then they just go back to doing whatever they were doing. And we never discussed it again. I did learn how to do my taxes. It was not too bad because I Googled a lot and found TurboTax. Honestly, if you're scared of taxes, don't know how to do it, this is not promoted. I'm just saying, for me, I could never do it paper. I'm just saying, TurboTax, if you're really stuck on time, try it. It might be good for you. Worst comes to worst, you can blame them and be like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm uneducated. But that was the precursor to many of the issues I would face moving forward, which is that teenagers are not equipped to handle the federal and provincial processes that are required to obtain documentation. I hit 18 and I am exhausted. I had to figure out how to apply to colleges, what that meant, where that worked, how to get bursary funding, all this shit. And by the time I got into college, I was exhausted and tired and burnt out and not in a great place. Now I'm realizing I probably have like a crazy amount of learning disability issues that just like no one ever addressed for me because I was just smart enough that they were like, probably not a problem, just a quirk. So I was exhausted. I was tired. The time for me to apply for my citizenship rolled around and I was like, I'll do the paperwork some other time. 4 years later, okay, I haven't been to the doctor. I haven't been to an optometrist. I haven't done literally anything to take care of myself because I'm too tired and my executive functioning skills are shit. So, but then I finally meet a person who kind of becomes my mom, and she's like, here, I'll help you with these things. And then I realized I go to apply for my citizenship and I'm all excited because I'm like, I'm finally in a place. I'm finally good. I got all my shit. I've finished my things. This will be my thing now. And then I look at the requirements and I go, oh, I have my passport. I have ID still. And then I look at my ID and I realize there are some issues. So what had happened is in the time period from me becoming an adult to the point at which I wanted to apply for my citizenship, every single piece of ID I had expired all at the same time. The only thing I had that was valid was a SIN card, which means nothing, and my Alberta health card, which means nothing. I had an expired passport I could not use. I had an expired ID, not even a driver's license, just a learner's license for when I was like 14 or 16 or whatever. Useless. Couldn't use it. You can't use expired ID to get anything. I was like, well, shit. The complicated web of stuff you need. This is what would happen is I'd be like, okay, so in order to apply for my citizenship, I need birth certificate, ID, passport, all these supporting documents and recommendations from people. I can get my passport. Then I look at my passport. In order to get my passport, I had to go through the U.S. consulate or whatever it is. I had to have a valid birth certificate, a valid ID, all these other things. And I was like, well, shit, I don't have valid versions of any of those, so I guess I will get my ID. And then I look at my learner's license. In order to get a valid photo ID in Alberta, you need to have a birth certificate or something like that, and you need to have proof of residence, which is either a bill that has your address on it or a rental agreement. Now, I was moving around, so I hadn't had a permanent address in like 4 years. So I didn't have any ID that had the same address on. I didn't have any paperwork that had an address on, and I was like, well, shit, I don't even own a printer. I was like, okay, problem solving. I'll add an address to my bank account, and then I'll print that copy of my credit card off, and then I will print it off at Staples. You can pay Staples to do that for you. Okay, proof of residence. I can do that. But then I didn't have a birth certificate. And when I tried to get a birth certificate from my adopted parents, they just sent me like a shitty photocopy. That does not count. You need to have a notarized copy. Or I did anyways. Then I was like, well, shit, how do I get a birth certificate? So I had to go to the Washington Records and Registry, put in a bunch of information, and I didn't have it all because a lot of the things they ask you are like, what hospital were you born at? What time were you born? What was your legal name at the time of this? And because I'd been adopted, all of my legal documents had been changed to a different name. I didn't even know what information would have been on my original birth certificate because the copy of the birth certificate I had was an altered copy with new information. Because when you get adopted, what they do is they take your old birth certificate and they put your new adopted parents' names on it. It's really weird. That's how adoption works. They just change your birth certificate somehow. So I had to guess, and that took a really long time. So thankfully, eventually, after managing to get the support, because that's the thing, okay? Even if you want your birth certificate, you need certain supporting documents I didn't even have. It was impossible, okay? It was like this horrible web of knots that were other knots, and then those knots were then knots, and then sometimes those knots were not knots. So that's cool. So through a very complicated process, I finally got my birth certificate, and then I had to get my ID done. And then after my ID was done, one of the other things that was a photo ID that I did not have anymore was my permanent resident card, which is the most important one. You cannot travel without a permanent resident card. If you leave this country without your permanent resident card, they will say, sorry, can't get back in. Doesn't matter if you live here. Doesn't matter if all your friends and your job and everything you've ever known is across these gates. None for you. So I had no permanent resident card. And like, I was still so far behind. And I was like, oh, I'll just live in this country forever as a homeless person. There's nothing for me anymore. I was like in tears. I was like, there's nothing I can do. I'm never gonna have a life. And it was like, it felt impossible and also ridiculous because I went to school here. I like my entire school history is in Canada. I own a business here in Canada. I'm registered. There's like so many things that are like, I am registered in Canada for stuff and none of it counts for proving you're a real person that lives here. So I was like, oh, I'm done. I give up. I cried myself to sleep. And thankfully, like an angel from above, my boyfriend's mom was like, we want to go to Mexico and you're coming coming with us. So I don't know how she did it, okay? But somehow she finished the process for me. She bullied an MP into giving us a letter saying that we're allowed to come back into the country just in case there's something wrong with my PR card. Incredible stuff. I don't know how she did it, but now I have a passport. I have a permanent resident card. I have my photo ID, my Alberta's health card, my SIN number, all of that shit, okay? It just like magically appeared because this woman is a god when it comes to paperwork. Honestly, we all need moms in our lives, and it sucks if you don't have one. If you can't, steal someone else's because it's worth it. Steal someone else's mom. So yeah, that's what happened the first time. But then here I am this year thinking I've finished. So I'm talking to my younger brother, and he had just like moved out on his own at like 19. He had nothing, okay? He had no ID, he had no passport, he had no birth certificate, nothing. It was all expired also. And I was like, well, shit, should be easier. You're a Canadian citizen. It's not. I had to like go through all the paperwork. I was looking at it and I was like, okay, we need your birth certificate. Easy. I contact registries. I'm like, what do I need to get this thing? And then they were like, oh, sorry, wrong office. So here's a different email. So it was like playing email tag for hours with random people until finally I managed to get all the information I needed to then apply for his birth certificate, which was insane. Okay, then I go to the registry's office, and the registry's office ladies in town, so nice, love them. So I bring the paperwork after having like gone up to see my brother, and we like shittily fill it all out between the two of us. And I'm like, here's the paperwork we have. I am acting as his mother because we have no parents. This is all the information I possess. This is everything we own. And the registry's office ladies were like, well, you need to know where the parents on your birth certificate were born. And I was like, what the fuck? So we're sitting at the registry's office trying to guess where my adopted parents were born, assuming, hopefully, that they're the ones on his birth certificate, which they were, thankfully. It was terrible, okay? Because if we fucked up too many times, it was like, you know those login attempt counters? It's like that for registering to get your own fucking birth certificate. I have the paperwork all filled out with all the information I have, with his address, everything. We're guessing where my parents live. We're born. Terrible process. Finally, we submit the paperwork. I wait weeks. Okay, it wasn't actually that long. It was way faster than me getting any of my documents, but I was anxious for my brother because he's going through some shit. I get the birth certificates, and I'm like, okay, awesome, we have two. Because I was sure, you know, I was really careful. I was like, okay, we're gonna order at least 2 copies so that if anything happens the first one, I will have a copy, and then you'll be safe. I order them. I spent all night printing off the different forms and pre-filling them out for him because I don't know. I think he has ADHD or something because he cannot focus on forms like at all. It's actually like painful to watch. I love him so many, but like no one should ever make people with learning disabilities do this much paperwork. It's actually unethical. So anyways, I'm like pre-filling out all these forms, okay? I'm stapling them together. I'm putting notes and like little check boxes of like what things need to be included with each package of forms. I wrap them up nicely into envelopes. I put the addresses on each envelope because that's the thing, okay? When you're applying for documents, it's not just like one office that you send stuff to and then they handle all of it. It's separate places. It might be records and registries, it might be a hospital, it might be like the Canadian embassy or shit. I don't even know. There's so many things. The packages of the forms as filled out as possible with check marks of the documents that we needed copies of to go in the envelope. Then I had the addresses on them. I even included postage on the little envelopes just in case, because I don't know if my brother would know how to get stamped. Okay, so I pack it all in this neat little package. I pay express mail, okay, for it to be there Friday. And then he doesn't get it for a month. And at this point, we're kind of on a time crunch because there's stuff that we need his ID for. That was neat. And now we're again at the process where he needs to go to the registry's office with birth certificate and proof of residence, which I'm not sure he has, but I'm hoping he can print it off somehow from somewhere, from some god. Maybe someone will give him a rental agreement he can print. I don't know. Just so that he can get his ID, so that we can then work towards getting his passport and such. And that's the thing, okay, passport, there's so many other steps. Like, who has money and time to go to the Staples and get their picture taken in the specific format? Because one of the things is that when you get the pictures from Staples, you have to write the date on the back, and the person who takes the picture has to signature it to prove that it's really you and they really saw you there. It's insane, okay? People that are like, oh, immigrants, so easy, you just get your documentation like that. Liars. Fucking liars. Trash. I'm sorry. It's just crazy how ignorant people are about how fucking difficult paperwork is as soon as you have any kind of functioning issues. Like, it's okay, it took me like 5 years to fill out 3 sets of forms because of how mentally exhausted I was as a person and emotionally unstable. Yeah, I don't know. If you are a young person, maybe within the not quite adult phase, and you haven't yet had to deal with personal ID, it is very, very important. You never ever let any of your ID expire. If you have a passport or a driver's license or whatever, It is so much easier to renew these things before they expire than it is to do it after everything has expired and you have no proof to support the other proof. Because weirdly, you can live in a country for years and years and years. You can pay taxes every single year. You can go to school. You can access government resources. But if you do not have non-expired ID, you do not count. You're not a real person. Yeah, it's very, very important. SIN numbers, those last forever. In Canada, I just learned we don't get a new one if you lose it. So memorize that shit. Memorize your SIN number. Very important. Alberta Health Card. You can get new copies of these. You send it in the mail. Actually, the Alberta Health Card, easiest one to get if you lose it. But you do need to know the number of the Alberta Health Card, so it's better that you just have. If you get one of the shitty paper ones because they don't give you the nice plastic ones anymore, laminate that shit. Don't have a laminator, too expensive. That's okay. I used clear tape. I just clear taped the shit out of it, put it in a safe spot. Sometimes you can get multiple copies. I'm not sure if that's allowed, but I did that before. It was very helpful for multiple years. Yeah, Alberta Health Card, that one, you really just have the number, and then if you lose it, you'll have it again. But yeah, the ultimate ones, the most important ones. Passport, make sure it never expires because it's very hard to get. The passport is the hardest one, by far, of all the processes I've been through to get documentation. Passport, hardest one, most difficult. Never let this expire. If you have one, kiss your parents, thank them. If you have any kind of photo ID, okay, you need it, all right? If you aren't planning on driving, get your province's photo ID or whatever your country equivalent is. I don't know where you live. Get that one, okay? You need photo ID because almost everything will be like, oh, you can have this kind of ID, which is like your permanent resident landing status. But you also need photo ID, which is why passport and photo ID are important. Get that. I don't care if you have to pretend that you like driving to get your learners. Something. Have one of those. I don't know if this is helpful. I'm not sure if this made any sense. Maybe this application process isn't even applicable to most countries. But it's very hard and difficult, and I hated it, and it made me cry all the time because I was like, I'll just die here. It's too much work. The insurmountable things that I have to accomplish, going from place to place, hopping from office to office, for people to tell me, sorry, not my monkeys, not my circus. Exhausting, frustrating, emotionally upsetting. So if you have ever been in this situation, I feel you, man. It sucks ass. If you are currently embarking on this process, I promise you, it is possible. Very difficult, but it's possible. If you can, steal someone's mom or just someone who has a good brain for paperwork, because red tape is bullshit. People that succeed in this task, very pushy, okay? Find a Karen. Pick up that Karen. Adopt her as your own and be like, you shall be my tool. And then get the Karen to be really mean to the people so that they give you the things that you need. I know that might sound unethical, but when it comes to you being able to prove you exist legally in a country and having access to the opportunities that you should have, make that shit happen. You're allowed to be demanding because you're allowed to exist. This isn't meant to be like a philosophy thing. I'm just letting you know. So yeah, it's possible. It is doable. I've done it at least twice now, and every time it sucked, but it sucked less the second time because I understood it. If you are an older person and you see a younger person struggling with this shit, don't just hand them a bunch of paperwork and be like, it's probably easy. Not gonna be easy, okay? The godlike mom that came down from the heavens to help me, at first she was like, psh, couldn't be that hard. And then when she realized it was hard, she put her serious mode goggles on and was like, all right. Additionally, if you are a foster child in Alberta and you're an adult, you can access your foster care records. It's very heavy. There's lots of sad shit in there. A lot of things that probably aren't very fun to read. But if there's any part of you that's like, this would be important for me to have this information, just like for my own stuff, it's accessible to you. A lot of really interesting things in there. My package of foster care record documents, it was like huge. Over 400 pages of stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of paperwork you can access. You should have it. Also, file management. If you don't know how to manage your files, that is okay, but at least keep yourself a cheat sheet, like it'll have your SIN number, the number of the different things on your different cards, because if you lose your passport and you're applying for it, one of the things they ask you on the form is like, what is your passport number? What is the date of the expiry and whatever? And you have to have that, okay? So if you're worried about losing your stuff, or it's a piece of ID that you take with you, photocopy that shit. Go to a notary. Get those things stamped as notarized photocopy. Make a cheat sheet with your SIN number and all that shit on it. Maybe don't keep it in a digital copy. That's probably not very cyber safe. And file management, keep all your important documents in a spot. You always know where it is. Mine is a bright yellow envelope. It's always in the same spot. Has all my things, all the cards, everything. Yeah, this is just like a quick life lesson on proving your existence legally. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking maybe I'll share some other things I had to learn about being an adult that sucked and were hard. I hope you have a good day. I believe in you. I know you got this. Okay, bye.